Something is happening outside your window right now. The birds know a storm is coming, not because they can see dark clouds on the horizon, not because they heard thunder in the distance, and not because they checked a weather forecast. In many cases, birds begin changing their behavior hours before the first drop of rain falls. The feeders become crowded. Activity suddenly increases. Birds that were scattered across multiple yards begin gathering in the same places. To most people, it looks random, but it is not, because the birds already know. Somehow, they are detecting changes in the atmosphere long before humans notice anything at all. The question is how? Welcome to the hidden mind of birds. Today we are going to uncover the hidden sense that allows birds to detect storms long before humans can, why their behavior changes hours before the weather arrives, and what those changes can reveal about the world outside your window. Because once you understand what birds are actually sensing, you will realize they have been predicting the weather right in front of you all along. Let us start with the science, because it is stranger and more precise than most people know. When a storm system approaches, the first thing it sends ahead of itself is not rain. It is not wind. It is not even clouds. The first thing that arrives is a change in barometric pressure, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on everything beneath it. As a low-pressure system builds and moves towards you, the air pressure drops. For humans, this registers as vague joint ache, a headiness, sometimes a headache. We notice it dimly, if at all. But in birds, this information does not stay vague. It goes straight to a specialized anatomical structure in their inner ear, called the vitale organ, a tiny cluster of sensory cells that birds have and mammals do not. This organ functions as a living barometer. It's always monitoring. It is measuring the atmospheric pressure around the bird in real time, continuously, the way your eyes continuously process light. When the pressure drops even slightly, and we are talking about changes too small for human detection, the vitale organ signals. The bird's nervous system responds. The behavior changes. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets specific. Research published in the journal Eplastone studied golden-winged warblers in the Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee. Scientists discovered that days before a major tornado outbreak, before any visible storm system was detectable in the immediate sky, the warblers abruptly abandoned their nesting sites and flew hundreds of miles south. When the storm passed, they returned. The birds had not seen anything. They had not felt wind or rain. They had detected the leading pressure edge of the system, with enough lead time to execute a full evacuation and return safely. The researchers were careful and methodical about this. They were not expecting what they found. One scientist, Henry Strebe of the University of California, Berkeley, described the response as a reaction to what they called infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced by large storm systems that travel faster than the storm itself, inaudible to humans, but detectable by birds who can hear, well into the infrasound range. So birds are not just sensing pressure. They are, in some cases, hearing the storm before it exists, in any form you could perceive. What this means for your yard is this. When the birds at your feeder begin behaving strangely hours before the weather changes, they are not acting on instinct in the vague, folksy sense of that word. They are responding to real, measurable atmospheric data that their bodies are built to receive. The backyard house finch has better weather instrumentation in its skull than most people carry in their pocket. There is something worth sitting with in that. Pay attention to this next part, because most people see this behavior and do not know what they are looking at. One of the most consistent signs of incoming storm pressure is a sudden, intense feeding frenzy. You have seen this. Maybe you have noted it without quite knowing what it meant. The feeders are covered. Birds that were leisurely picking at seeds an hour ago are now eating fast, moving fast, displacing each other, coming back immediately if pushed away. This is not random excitement. It is metabolic preparation. Birds have extraordinarily fast metabolisms. A small bird like a chickadee can burn through most of its daily caloric reserve in a single cold night. During a storm, foraging stops. Feeders become inaccessible or dangerous. Flights are grounded. A bird that enters a multi-day storm system with an empty fat reserve can die of exposure before the sky clears. So when that barometric pressure begins to drop in, the vitale organ fires its signal. One of the first behavioral responses is this: eat as much as possible, as fast as possible. Right now, the American goldfinch, the white-throated sparrow, the downy woodpecker, every bird that detects the coming pressure drop begins building energy stores with visible urgency. They are, in a precise sense, loading fuel before the flight goes dark. Researchers at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology have documented that feeder activity spikes measurably in the 6 to 12 hours before major storm systems arrive. This spike is not caused by the storm. It is caused by the bird's anticipation of the storm, triggered by barometric cues, before any human observer would look at the sky and say anything is wrong. If you keep a feeder and you start to notice this kind of sudden crowding, frantic eating, and unusually high traffic, you can treat it as a forecast, a feathered, living, low-tech forecast that has been operating in your yard for years without you ever fully reading it. Now, let us talk about what happens to birds' voices before a storm, because this one surprises people every time. In the hours before significant weather arrives, many songbirds go quiet. The morning chorus thins out. The house wren that sings from the shrub near your back door goes silent. The robins that were calling all morning disappear, not just from sight, but from sound. This sudden quiet feels wrong, if you notice it. It feels like an absence, but it is not absence. It is decision. Birdsong is energetically expensive. Singing costs calories. It draws attention. During normal conditions, those costs are worth it. Singing establishes territory, attracts mates, maintains pair bonds. But when the body is running a pre-storm protocol, diverting energy to feeding, beginning to seek shelter, processing a storm signal, singing drops in priority. The bird is not sad. The bird is not hiding. The bird is reallocating. There is also a pressure dimension here. Research from the University of Sheffield has shown that birds modulate their vocalizations in response to atmospheric conditions, including pressure changes. Some species actually alter the frequency or intensity of calls as pressure drops, as if recalibrating their communication for changing acoustic conditions. What sounds like silence to you may, in some cases, be a bird that is still communicating, just differently, just below the threshold where you would pick it up. What this means practically is that if you step outside on an otherwise ordinary morning and the yard feels strangely quiet, no wrens, no robins, fewer sparrow calls than usual, check the pressure. Check the forecast. The birds may have already filed the weather report. This is the part that changes the way you think about birds sitting still. In the final hours before a major storm, something shifts again. The frantic feeding slows. The birds begin to move into cover. Dense shrubs, conifer canopies, the thick tangle of a hedgerow, the deep interior of a spruce. And then they stop. They sit. They are still in a way that looks, to a passing human, like nothing. Just a bird on a branch, not doing anything. But watch the eyes. A bird in pre-storm shelter is not resting in the relaxed sense. Its metabolic processes are still elevated. Its senses are still fully alert. What it is doing is minimizing exposure while maximizing perceptual range. By sitting motionless in dense cover, the bird becomes invisible to predators that are also responding to the weather system. Predators that may be more active and less careful in the minutes before a storm breaks. The stillness is not passivity. It is a highly specific defensive posture. The bird is watching everything, moving nothing, spending almost no energy, waiting for the system to pass. A study from Lund University in Sweden tracked great tits and blue tits in the hours surrounding storm events and found that birds shifted to this storm hold posture as much as 4 to 5 hours before the storm arrived. They were not reacting to rain or wind. They were pre-positioning long before any visible weather change, based entirely on internal barometric and sonic cues. The bird you see perfectly still on a branch inside a dense shrub at 2 in the afternoon, for no obvious reason, may be 4 hours ahead of tonight's storm. It has already made its preparations. It is waiting. quiet and completely aware, for the sky to do what it already knows the sky is going to do. Let us come back to where we started, that feeder in your yard. Those birds moving with urgency under a blue sky. The sudden crowding, the fast eating, the quieting of the songs, the birds disappearing one by one into the thick places, into the still places, into the places you cannot easily see. You are watching something real. You are watching a network of living barometers, each one reading the invisible leading edge of weather and responding with precision refined over millions of years of evolution. There is no app update for this. There is no signal lag. The birds are not checking the radar. They are the radar. And here is what strikes me most about this, the thing I keep returning to. You have been living beside this system your entire life. Every storm you have ever experienced, the birds in your yard knew it was coming, quietly, efficiently, without any drama. They filed the information, loaded their reserves, went still, and waited. And most of the time, you walked past them without knowing what you were seeing. That is not a failure of attention. It is just what happens when you share space with creatures whose interior lives are operating on a register that runs parallel to yours. Built from the same world, shaped by the same pressures, but tuned to frequencies you were never given the hardware to hear. They are paying attention to the same sky you are. They are just reading a different layer of it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed your backyard birds behaving strangely right before a major storm? Did the feeders go crazy? Did the yard go suddenly silent? Or did the birds just seem to vanish before the sky changed? I want to hear your story. I read every one. I will see you in the next one.